Good night, everyone. Today was the last day of our workshop, and actually, a year ago today, I presented my graduation project, which this year I worked on the project to design it into a workshop with my partner, Wala. And as we were preparing for the workshop to work with the local students in Pristina, I started pondering the question, who draws the map? What if I told you that this was an accurate map? It isn't trying to be spatially accurate or measure any distances, but it does show us a certain worldview. So we know that maps tell us what people believed mattered. Like this Bunting map shows us that a certain Christian medieval worldview. We often think maps are neutral, but they've never described the world. They describe like a particular person's view of the world. In the graduation project research, we studied, every map answers 3 questions. What deserves to be seen and what deserves to disappear? And most importantly, who gets to decide? So in the graduation project research, as we were preparing like map after map, using sources from the Israeli municipality and from Palestinian NGOs, we could only come to one conclusion, which is that mapping wasn't recording reality, it was actually editing reality. In the project research, we studied the typical site analysis subjects, the geopolitical, historical, and social context, and then carried out also your typical program, the concept, vision, the land use plan, the master plan, and the 3D shots even. But as Wala and I were planning the workshop, we realized that we still couldn't get the full picture of Jerusalem. And so the workshop slowly stopped being about designing space, and it was becoming about understanding space. So this is what led us to design the workshop the way that we did. We had the students map out the geopolitical context of Jerusalem by hand, layer by layer, and they drew the Israeli settlements, the Palestinian communities, the existing apartheid wall and the proposed building of the wall, the 1949 Green Line, and the checkpoints, the E1 expansion area, and slowly they started piecing together their own version of the narrative. They slowly started to see the planning restrictions and the occupation policies and the resulting fragmentation of Palestinian communities. We studied narratives of photography and literature and had them also see them from different perspectives of different characters. And then we had them visualize the narratives using collages. The different narratives included the E1 expansion area and the Qalandia airport, which is now closed, the apartheid wall, and the land theft using afforestation. And together we made a map of all the collective narratives, visualized the way that the students saw them. So maybe what I learned the most is that the most important thing that I should teach isn't how to draw or read maps, but it should be how to question them. Thank you. Okay. So Amira wants to talk a few minutes about the
Oh, okay. So,
You come up.
do you want to come on this side?
Sure.
Just so you're not squeezing there. Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine. Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm one of the participants in this workshop, and I'd like to mainly talk about the concept of afforestation, which is the main concept that I was investigating. Afforestation as a term sounds really good, and this is one of the ways that the colonial state of Israel uses language and policy to influence the way Westerners perceive their state and their territorial occupation. How afforestation differs from, for example, reforestation is reforestation reintroduces a landscape that was there before or restores a forest that was there before. Afforestation, in contrast, plants a forest or creates a landscape that was previously non-existent. Through the example of afforestation in Palestine, it's really visible to see how the state of Israel uses every single method it can, including policy and the environment, as a technology of its colonialism. Within Palestine, in the 1920s and 1930s, when Jewish settlers first came, they tried to repopulate, again, quote unquote, repopulate the landscape in newly made forests, which were mainly consisted of Western tree species, which failed, obviously. But then later on, they realized that pine trees could be a way to increase the afforestation in the quote-unquote barren landscape. It's important to mention here the really, really famous quote that Jewish people used when they first settled Palestine, called "A land without a people for a people without a land." From the start, the land was characterized as without people, non-existent and barren, and afforestation is just a tool to further this point of view. They planted pine trees for the most part, especially after the Nakba in 1948 and the Six-Day War in 1967. They created the Land and Forest Fund, which spatializes this afforestation on a policy level, creating policies which mainly fragment and isolate Palestinian people, reducing their power over the land and controlling them completely using the power of nature. So as a topic of research, this really helped me realize how policies don't really affect people on a built level, but also on an unbuilt level. And we as architects mainly think about the settlements as built places, as occupied places which have been built over, but it's also important to think about them in this non-built way on a policy level and also on a landscape level. Thank you.
Well, you wanna? No. Yeah, so, any questions? Should I like? Any questions for Amira or Amir? The duo.
He's my straight A student.
Yeah. Just a general like.
I guess a general question would be, how do you when it comes to afforestation in Gaza, especially now when everything, like 80% is just concrete, when 80% of almost like 100% of the country is completely destroyed. So how do you think about afforestation and also rebuilding and when there's just still chaos? So how do you how do you suggest in doing that, especially when it's still colonized and there's still conflict and the world's still not recognizing that it's genocide?
Yeah. Should I go?
Because these are all great concepts, but how do we actually take action? How do other countries actually help to follow?
Okay, so afforestation as a concept, especially the way it's implemented in Palestine, is strictly a colonial thing because of the way it's implemented. So, as I mentioned, these forests are mainly comprised of pine trees, and that's it. That's why they fail as projects, because colonials don't really have the contextual understanding. Afforestation may be a good thing, yes, when implemented, for example, in a Western country that has the privilege of professionals working with the country itself. For example, if this would happen in Germany, I'm sure German landscape architects would work with policymakers to create a proper ecological system. Because Israel is a colonial state, the way I understand it at least, is they don't really want to fit in with the context. They want to bring in Western ideals and Western ideas of what a forest is supposed to look like or what a landscape is supposed to look like. So you don't get a contextual driven project, you get a project driven by a massive top-down approach. So it becomes less about the landscape, it becomes more about what the country uses as an instrument to divide the people. For example, there's a lot of places towards the coast where land is delegated as a land reserve, which splits a community apart, right? And because the Palestinians, because it's an apartheid state, the Palestinians don't really have any power there. So that is what the research is mostly about. But yeah, I do agree. Afforestation could be a good thing when done in a good way. In this example, it is not.
So then what about the olive trees, right? So that is part of the indigenous. So the deforestation is really bringing the indigenous in the area that has not been before, but it can still prosper because of the location and the temperature and everything that actually, the climate that it allows for that specific species to actually not only exist but to thrive. So considering that Israel does deconstruct the olive trees, which are not, they are part of that landscape. I guess it's more of like, what else, what are other, I guess, species that could be used, or even like with olive trees that are being deconstructed right now. And so we're talking about afforestation, but what about the deconstructing of what is already there? And so how do we, again, it's like, how do we help, what do we do, how do we kind of bring in something that people can still utilize what is already there and what's left?
Should I answer?
Yeah, sure. I also want to add.
Yeah, so I'm not a landscape architect. I just finished third year, but I think that the most thoughtful way to approach this, if thought is considered in the future by the Israeli state, would be to look at the context as it was before, look at the natural landscape. So afforestation hasn't really worked so far. I'm sure you know that there are wildfires every single year in Israel. That is because these forests created with afforestation are mainly comprised of pine trees, which burn really easily. They completely destroy the other shrubs that would keep the moisture levels to a good level, which are more fitted to the rocky limestone landscape. So yeah, I think looking at the land as it was before, with a lot of shrubs, a lot of local species, would be a good thing to do.
One point I would like also to add here that I really appreciate the question, but I wanted to point out what we worked on the workshop. What we wanted to emphasize, like to refer here, like Amira and I were actually like while we were working on preparing the workshop. I was also surprised by the complexity, by the layered complexity of the problem of Eastern Jerusalem. And I think it's very important to also understand it over time. And we thought maybe the best way to understand it is to try to read and try to understand it from the narratives of Palestinians themselves. So what we worked with the students, each student like had one text, like we kind of like thought of what topics we want here like to read or to analyze. And then each student, for example, Amir, worked on an article like by a Palestinian writer talking about the problem of afforestation over time in Palestine. So that was for us very important. It's just like first to understand the problem and also try to reclaim the narrative by first understanding it. So even like here, for us, the main question was not about like kind of like proposing solutions or even thinking now of solutions, especially for someone who's working on a workshop for 4 days. And I think like your question should be answered by Palestinian architects, not even like during our workshop. And this was for us very important. First, just like to kind of try to understand the problem for someone who is not familiar even with the context. Thank you. Maybe you also want to
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
There's one more question over there. This is a good thing. This is a good thing.
So yes, I also wanted to highlight another important layer that is related to these practices towards the Palestinian landscape after it have been occupied, especially in the area of Jerusalem, because we will also talk a little bit about this in our presentation. Jerusalem is a city, and it lived through the villages around it, which is the rural land that have been feeding themselves and the city itself. So these lands are mainly the basket that the area lived upon. And when the Israelis put their hand on these lands, they were facing the dilemma that the people are really related to these landscapes. They used to take care of them, they used to graze their cattle there. So this landscape was too much holding not only memory, but the presence of the Palestinians at every aspect of their lives, because it's not wilderness. It's cultivated land of Palestinian family and villages who they had just depopulated from these places. So one thing was putting this foreigner kind of landscape, which is more relevant to Germany and the Black Forest than the Mediterranean area through the JNF, the Jewish National Fund money. But the other thing was other mechanisms to cut this historical relation with the ground. For example, Palestinians hold this very deep knowledge about herbs and other plants that are wild in the area. So now it's illegal to cut these herbs that we use sometimes for tea, sometimes for cooking. It becomes illegal to cut off these. So it's also, in a way, cutting off this continuous generational knowledge about these landscapes. And the third level was grazing, because these communities, Palestinian communities, have Bedouin communities between the villages, and the villagers themselves, they had cattle. And cattle was part of the ecosystem, not just a means of production. Like even the waste of the cattle was fertilizing the land and creating also this kind of continuous feeding for the place. And the other thing Israelis did, they prohibited any grazing in these areas. Without grazing, a lot of weeds were growing. And also the problem of fires is not just the pine trees, but these weeds that catch fire very quickly. And just recently, with the last fire that happened, they allowed grazing again. Like you can bring your cattle and let it go around the landscape around Jerusalem, just for the benefit that they won't have to deal with these grand fires again.